there, everybody, and welcome to the Escapist movie podcast. This week coming to you from my closet. My name is Jack Packard.
I'm Darren Mooney.
And I'm Maggie Eichen. I am the special guest this week. I have written for a couple of publications around the internet, mainly covering horror movies for a site called Fright Day, which I did for a few years. So yeah, that's that.
Yeah, we appreciate you making time for us, Maggie. This week is a episode mostly about adaptations, but just this morning, last night, very recently, we got some Wonder Woman news. So we're going to go over a little bit of Wonder Woman news, and then it's all about adaptations. Tom Holland's Uncharted movie is making news finally after being in development heck for so long. We're going to talk about the movie The Guilty, which is now being remade for American audiences, starring Jake Gyllenhaal. And then at the end, the mother of all adaptations, the comic book adaptation. We're going to take a look at The New Mutants, which is now available video on demand. And that's all the topics. So this is it, the Escapist Movie Podcast. Boo-doot-doot-doot-doot-doot. Wha. Pretty good. That was a pretty good little intro song I did there.
It was. And I think that adding Wonder Woman to our topics proves that we are ourselves very adaptable.
Oh, Darren, what would I do without your puns?
Probably run a more efficient podcast, if we're being honest.
That's fair. You're right. So big Wonder Woman news. The big news that just dropped was that on Christmas Day, at least here in America, Wonder Woman is hitting theaters and HBO Max, which is a big shift in position from Warner Brothers, who was very, very focused on a theatrical only release. But it's coming to video on demand. We don't know yet if it's premium a la Mulan or just part of the service a la Soul. But it's competing with Soul.
I may actually have Googled this, Jack, actually. I may have actually Googled this, and it is going no charge, no surplus, no surcharge.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, listeners, we are doing this live. Very much live.
This is quite literally brand new news. That makes me wonder, though, about like Mulan's box office bring in as far as its premium service ticket price is concerned. Obviously not that spectacular if others are not following suit.
Well, I mean, it is notable. Like, I think they published, again, all of this is fugazi, waza, wooza, numbers in the air, speculation, nobody knows anything sort of stuff. But I think that a couple of weeks ago, they published, like, the top 10 video-on-demand titles for the year in question. And if I recall correctly, Mulan was surprisingly low on it, and it was much, much lower than Disney Plus's Hamilton, which had been a bigger release early in the year. And like Hamilton had been bought for something like $70 million for Disney. They'd planned to release it in theaters. They released it on streaming without a surcharge. And it became arguably, certainly one of the first big streaming era blockbusters, arguably the biggest blockbuster of the kind of summer that never was, trumping movies like, say, Greyhound on Apple or kind of Palm Springs on Hulu. And so, like, I can imagine looking at that and going, well, your big push for Mulan, A, wasn't successful enough for you to try it again with Black Widow. B, wasn't big enough to make it even your biggest streaming service blockbuster of the year that's been. So yeah, I can see why maybe... Yeah, that's egg on your face, am I right? Meanwhile, people have stopped picking on Tenet for a little while, so we're going to enjoy this while we can. So I can see why Warner Brothers might go, not really worth the hassle, and particularly when, as you pointed out, they're looking at December 25th as the release date for the States, which is the same day that Disney Plus are releasing Soul, which will be released without a surplus or premium charge. I can see Warner Brothers going, if we want to compete in that market, we don't want people to have to pay the $8 subscription for HBO Max and an extra surcharge on top. We want them to be able to go, it will cost as much as it would to watch Soul, except this one is a live action blockbuster and therefore, as we joked, I think last week we talked about animation, a real movie. In certain, I know. I don't actually believe that, but that's very much the kind of messaging that you're going to see coming out of this. You can watch the cartoon or you can watch the real movie. But yeah, so I think that's, I can understand why Warner's may not have wanted to add $30 on top. I can also say that my parents were really, really, really angry when they paid for Disney Plus and then decided that they wanted to watch Mulan and were told you have to pay $20 or $29 on top of your subscription to watch it. So I wonder how much of that filtered through social media.
Absolutely. Which is, I mean, like this is the real situation, which is theaters are partially opening. People are definitely not going out to them. Is this finally the big movie studios calling it, saying we're going to cut our losses, we need to output something?
I would hope so. And I hope that honestly it kind of continues. As somebody who, okay, I love movie theaters. I don't want to talk trash on movie theaters because they're great. And we have a lot of really great ones in the Milwaukee area where I live. I have like debilitating social anxiety and I hate leaving my house. So being able to stream them on these streaming services is so efficient and I love it. And also it's kind of just the right thing to do right now is to be able to offer it this way. I hope it's a sign of more things to come, just more streamlined releases like this instead of doing. There's a movie that just came out recently that was only doing a theatrical release. Freaky is theatrical for like 2 or 3 weeks and then coming to VOD.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, please just do those at the same time, please.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be controversial here. I don't mind having the exclusive theatrical window. Like, I don't mind the fact that I can't see Freaky because I'm living in a place where cinemas aren't open. Because if I wait a couple of weeks, it will be available for me to watch then. I don't feel like I'm, and again, there's that fear of missing out sort of thing as well. But I don't really feel that, as Jack pointed out, because nobody's going to cinemas anyway. So I don't really feel like I'm kind of locked out or missing it. I don't have an objection to movies opening in theaters and then coming to streaming later on. Like, I think it's, Tenet, which opened exclusively in cinemas, will be arriving on streaming in time for Christmas. And you can watch it there if you haven't been able to watch it in cinemas. I don't know. I don't find myself kind of like going, well, it should go to streaming first or immediately or as a kind of a course of action. But again, I'm willing to concede I'm probably old-fashioned and kind of cranky and old man shakes fist at cloud when it comes to that sort of stuff, And I understand everything Maggie's saying. Sorry.
No, I mean, we have just gorgeous theaters here in our city. And like, I feel bad saying that because I do want to support them. It's just right now I'm probably not going to do that sort of a thing.
That's fair. Yeah.
Well, that to me is like the biggest forethought of the trying to release them in a theater in some capacity, which is throwing a lifeline to the theater system. If we have a system where all these movies go to video on demand, theaters are going to dry up. At very least, the big chain theaters are going to dry up. Obviously, the art house mom and pops, they have their niche already. And so, like, while I love both, I love the theater going experience, but I also have a family of 4, so much prefer the video on demand prices. It's a weird balancing act, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, it's very much kind of striking that balance is the kind of impossible thing to do. And like, again, the issue is this is a bigger problem. When we talk about this in terms of talking about cinema, this is a bigger problem than talking about like the release of Wonder Woman. Like, being entirely honest, the issue with putting movies in cinemas right now, or cinemas will die, is insane. Because, like, you shouldn't be in that situation. You should not be in a situation where Christopher Nolan has to release Tenet in cinemas or, like, the movie industry will die. It should be a situation where we all say, and again, not getting too political, but we're all saying, this is a terrible situation we're all in. We should not be encouraging anybody to go outdoors under any circumstances whatsoever. And that includes, for the purpose of this podcast, going to the cinema. So we should maybe look at a model that allows cinemas to close for an extended period without worrying about whether or not they will be able to reopen when they come out the other side. To succinctly summarize, though, the point is that we shouldn't be worrying about the fact that cinemas are probably going to die because of the situation that we're in, but we are, and it is completely insane. But yes, I agree entirely with everything Maggie says and Jack says, which is like, in this situation we're in, where we're all locked indoors, it is good to have movies that you can stream with your family in safe conditions, affordably, and like at Christmas, which is probably one of the few times in this year of 2020 that you are going to get to maybe be happy with the people that you love, and that's if you are extremely lucky. Then yeah, I entirely understand why that's a good thing. But yeah, I hate that we're in a situation where we're like, yeah, but the future of cinema depends on the release of Wonder Woman. It shouldn't. It absolutely shouldn't.
Right. Well, and like that's broad. That's like a broad blanket draped across every single business. Obviously, this is a movie podcast, so we're talking about cinemas. But of course, on just a personal, possibly selfish note, I am very excited to see the new Wonder Woman. I am excited that will take up, some Christmas or some post-Christmas time. I'm looking forward to it. All right, great. This is the transition then into our theme of adaptations. The first talking point will be the Uncharted movie, which has been trying to make itself for the last 10 years or so, obviously based off of the very popular video game franchise, which itself was based off of Indiana Jones. So we have a little bit of a snake eating itself. Such is the world. The movie that didn't need to exist, Uncharted, because, and this my gamer side is going to come out a little bit here. The games are basically movies anyway. But Tom Holland's doing it. Marky Mark is producing it or directing it or something.
Mark Wahlberg is co-starring in it as Victor Sully Sullivan, the mentor figure. Apparently he was one of the many, 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 many Nate Drakes that were cast over the incredibly long 10-year incubation period that you mentioned. I love that you describe it as almost kind of willing itself into existence. It's like Uncharted was out there in the darkness just waiting to materialize in cinemas, and all it took was a pandemic. But yeah, so like Mark Wahlberg will be playing Victor Sullivan, and yeah, this is I'm not sure. Again, as you point out, it's really weird that we have like a cottage industry of movies that are like Indiana Jones, but not Indiana Jones, but adapted from other things that were ripping off Indiana Jones, like the National Treasure movies and things like that. And this really kind of has that feel of like, or even the Tomb Raider movies, which again, another video game adaptation that you can tell that everybody working on it was like, hey, we like Indiana Jones, right? Why don't we make something like Indiana Jones, but base it off a video game? I don't know. So yeah, Uncharted kind of has that feel to it, where I suspect, like, for all that it's taken 10 years to make, I worry it'll be a movie that I'll have forgotten about 30 minutes after I've left the cinema. And not in a good or bad way, just like as
Is the payoff really going to be as big as the lead up to it? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, what I'm expecting here is a pretty standard action adventure movie starring man who is going through tombs, right? Like, which is super fine. Like, that's a fine thing. But for some reason, they had to slap the Uncharted name on this in order to get it made, or not get it made. Like, I don't understand why. One, why this took so long. Two, why it's an Uncharted movie. And three, why I care about it at all. I hate to be so glib, but they have been trying to adapt video games to movies for a very long time. And I want to say they've had one success in Rampage. At least on my personal feelings. It was a dumb movie. But I think it was supposed to be.
I really believed it when this is me being genuine. I wasn't a huge fan of Rampage, but I really felt it emotionally when The Rock said, "I just want to know what's happening to my friend," when his friend happened to be like an 800-pound albino gorilla. Like that was like, I'm not a huge fan of Rampage, but watching the movie, I was like, that was the moment I went, that is why The Rock is a movie star. That there.
100%. Well, and I will not defend Rampage as a good movie. I am defending it as a good adaptation of a game, of a video game where you played as a giant gorilla that destroyed a city. If I can wibble wobble my way around that, I think.
So,
Oh, sorry.
no, I was gonna go in a kind of a different direction. I really liked Sonic when that got released. I know that kind of panned, but like in comparison to the Mario movie from what, 93, which I watched yesterday in preparation to talk about it.
Yes.
Like when you're talking about Uncharted and about how it has the name slapped on it, that Mario movie is actually really cool as a cheesy 90s kids action flick. But if you're talking about it as a Mario movie, no, there's nothing that has to do with the Mario game. Those Goombas, they're like weird reptilian things when the game makes them look. Yeah, you know, that's not a good adaptation. I enjoy it kind of as a film in itself. Astonishingly good cast for that.
Yeah.
But I think
Bob Hoskins, absolutely.
yes. And then on the other hand, our more recent adaptation in Sonic, I enjoyed it quite a bit. Like there wasn't a lot that, I don't know. I don't understand why people didn't like it. I guess that's my point. It's like, I think everything that I wanted these action sequences. I wanted to see Sonic go fast, go speedy boy, go fast. The re-illustration was much appreciated. The only thing that I didn't really like were the really cringy product placements, but like afterward, I talked about lumber liquidators. I've never talked about lumber liquidators before. I don't know if you remember that sequence. They were zooming around in the bar and there's like a commercial playing on the TV and it's lumber liquidators.
Nice.
I remember that. So,
so it worked.
Yeah, exactly.
The Sonic movie is a really strange movie, and like I also have the benefits of like having children, so I can peer a movie through their eyes. Because as an adult, it's like, you know, it's Sonic movie, but like they really thought it was funny. They enjoyed it. They had a good time overall. I think. Also, as a fan of Jim Carrey in general, it was nice to see him just go full ham and not care about anything, the script, the structure, the pacing, full ham 100% of the time. But again, like thinking of like adaptation, right? And like thinking about like Sonic as a character, the Sonic movie doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the video game besides the character existing.
Yeah, my big issue with the Sonic movie is that it's a really odd, really specific remake of the movie Hop, starring James Marsden. Like, they actually brought back James Marsden to play the same role that he played in Hop, of helping an adorable anthropomorphic CGI animal get across the country. That's kind of my big issue with Sonic. This is interesting when we talk about adaptations in video games. I kind of have a soft spot for the first Mortal Kombat movie, in large part because I think it's exactly what Maggie said. It's like, what do you want from a video game adaptation of this property? I want to see people punching each other, and it gives me people punching each other. And I'm like, okay, fine. Because I genuinely think that is an issue with, say, adaptation from one medium to another, particularly going from video games to film. Because obviously, like, you know, prose to screen is fairly standard. It's writing, it's talking, it's evoking imagery. You can do that sort of thing. Comic books, the argument using comic books as basically like kind of storyboards for movies. Although I think that you can point to things like, say, Zack Snyder's Watchmen and go, actually, no, they are very different media, and you can't simply replicate what works in one in the other. I think
don't tell Zack Snyder that.
Yeah. Don't mention it on the internet. The comment section will be fun. No, I say that as somebody who is awed in the biblical sense by the existence of Watchmen. Who's like, this is something that happened. This is something that people gave him, what, $100 million to make this? And he did? And I'm like, okay, I recognize that as a thing that happened. My thing with video games, though, is that video games are... like, they're a very immersive medium. They're about interacting. They're about engaging with what's on screen. They're like, it's about getting rid of that divide between you and what's happening and playing. And so it's about mashing buttons and experiencing what happens when you mash buttons on screen. And by definition, like, making a movie adaptation of most video games consists of, as Jack joked, just taking away the button pushings. It's just like the cutscenes. The best, most faithful video game adaptation will literally just be the cutscenes from a video game that you played. And what's the worst part of a video game? The cutscenes. What I will say, my personal favorite, sorry, video game cutscene enthusiast there, but what I will say, my favorite, and I'm going to be cheeky here, my favorite video game movie is probably The Edge of Tomorrow or Live, Die, Repeat starring Tom Cruise, because it's not actually a video game movie, but it feels when you watch it like the experience of playing a video game, particularly save scrumming. But the idea of kind of like doing the same stuff over and over again, the idea of kind of like repetition, the idea of like going through the same crap over and over again to get to the good part, and basically just starting over when it all fails and falls on your face. So like I think that's probably my favorite video game movie, even though it's very much a cheat answer. Is that like, because it's the one that feels to me like playing a video game. It's like watching the experience of somebody playing the video game, but in a way that's fun and engaging. So that's probably like, I do think, like you mentioned, this is an adaptation section that we're talking about here, and I think adaptation is a key word here, perhaps.
Well, and like I think Edge of Tomorrow and or Live, Die, Repeat, a fantastic film, by the way, does a really good job of evoking the gameplay of a video game, right? The problem with adaptation, and this is something that, because we're here on The Escapist, I talk to with Yahtzee a lot over on our Slightly Civil War show, which is the thing that makes a film different than a book is its cinematography, using the language of camera placement and lights to help elevate the story. With video games, the cinematography is the gameplay, and the best video games use the gameplay to help elevate the story.
Yeah.
With something like Super Mario Brothers, like Sonic, like Uncharted, the actual gameplay is very standard and most of the time does not match the story. Uncharted specifically, the story is always about treasure hunting or discovering lost cities. That's the thrust of the story, whereas the gameplay is just about murdering people. You just, people are in there, you murder them, you move on to the next place where people are and you murder them. Gameplay is over here and story is over here.
How do you find treasure, Jack?
Touche. And so, like, I guess what I'm saying is Uncharted as a game is pretty basic and standard, and so therefore I'm expecting a basic and standard film to come out of it, whereas there are other better examples of games that use the gameplay to elevate that game. We could have much more interesting stories come out of that.
Like, my question there, though, is, like, is there ever an experience where you think that, like, those experiences of having those stories told you via gameplay would actually be enhanced by having them relayed to you via a movie screen? Would that add something to it? I mean, because I think that's the key to a really good adaptation, particularly of a property from another medium, is that it finds something that's distinct to film about it. It finds something that's distinct to the language or the medium that you're using that cannot be done in any other way. And like in many cases, like for really good, like The Godfather, which is arguably like the definitive adaptation of a book that is better, where the film is better than the book, finds a way through the language of cinema to tell you that story better than Mario Puzo's prose, which is not very good. Or Jaws, where where Steven Spielberg makes Jaws like the perfect cinematic experience in terms of building suspense, in terms of building tension, in terms of mounting dread, in terms of bringing the audience kind of through it. And if you read the book is a very different experience because it's a fundamentally different medium. So I'm wondering, like, if you're thinking about those video games that you mentioned where they use the gameplay to elevate it, would there be a case where you think that it could be improved, or where you wouldn't lose anything at the very least by making that transition into cinema?
It's so interesting because, like, I'm probably, I would say, more into movies than I am into video games. Like, I've definitely watched more movies than I've played games. But it just seems like there's so much more required to make a compelling game, than a compelling movie. Like, there's so many other pieces that have to come into play here. And to take it from the most interactive, the most in depth. Like games are not just 2 hours long. I mean, usually, sometimes they are. But like these longer, more cinematic games, they're longer than 2 hours. You have to keep people's attention. There's so much more development that comes that has to be given to that in order to get it to a point where you're ready to take it to market than with a lot of movies. And I don't mean that to like trash talk movies, because obviously I'm here and I love movies. But just like the fundamental like bridge from the video game to like the adaptation into the film, like it's
No, but like that noise is exactly right. Like because like film is by this point a very standardized medium. We have the template for your average film. We as an audience knows what to expect, whereas video games have so many wibbly wobbly components to them that finding that adaptation is in itself like the weird puzzle. I do think though there is a way to bridge that gap. Unfortunately, it will one, take a game that has a very strong theming gameplay component, and two, a filmmaker who actually respects that, which I don't believe we have had so far because video games are, relatively speaking, still a very young medium.
I would have you know that Raul Julia absolutely and completely immersed himself in the role of M. Bison by playing Street Fighter several hours a day with his kids. This is a heartwarming story, by the way, because apparently he had a terminal diagnosis at that point, and he literally just accepted the role in Street Fighter because A, they agreed to pay him a lot of money that would leave his family financially secure afterwards, and B, most of his movies were not movies that his kids could see, and he wanted to do a movie where his research for the role would involve him spending lots of time with his kids, so he took the role of M. Bison. And I cannot hate Street Fighter for that reason.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But and you know, the wonderful and talented Raul Julia aside, I think if we had like for example, if you had a situation where they wanted to make a Legend of Zelda video game. Legend of Zelda historically has themed its gameplay very well with its core story loop, which is that of discovery, exploration, and adventure. I think like swapping that into a filmic sense is very easy. It's Lord of the Rings. You're going to new worlds, you're discovering new things, and dealing with the hardships. Very similarly, if we look at, and I know this is the biggest BS example, and it's the one that arty farty fucks like myself use all the time, and I'm sorry, but I'm also not sorry because I'm going to use it. But if we look at something like Dark Souls, which is, you know, in my opinion, one of the greatest games that themes its gameplay along with its story, you can very simply swap out the mechanics of the difficulty, the dying, the forever struggle, the inevitability of death, and replace that with scene dressing and cinematography to get the same tone across. Apparently I had a lot more to say about Uncharted than I thought, but again, Uncharted as a game doesn't concern itself with the theme. It's the phrase ludonarrative dissonance, which is the story says one thing, but the gameplay tells you another thing. And so because it's a cheesy, schlocky game, it should be a cheesy, schlocky movie, but somehow they're gonna fuck it up. They always fuck it up. And I don't know why. Just make an Indiana Jones movie.
But yeah, is it going to be like the Tomb Raider kind of recent movie with Alicia Vikander, which again was modeled, I believe, on the rebooted game, which was incredibly hefty, weighty, serious, and dark. And it's like, that's not what I think of when I think of like Tomb Raider, or when I think of like Indiana Jones, which Tomb Raider is nominally ripping off. I actually think, and again, they're not good movies, but I actually think very much of the like Angelina Jolie movies from the 90s, which are just stupid adventure fun movies that occasionally have Daniel Craig in them. You know?
No, but like that's a great example. And you mentioned before the National Treasure movies, which are perfectly serviceable action adventure schlock movies, but they're not going to make that. They're going to try to much like they did in the 90s comic book movies, where they try to pull in too many references. They try to find their own style for things. I'm thinking of you, all black leather outfits in the first X-Men movies. Why did you think that was a good idea? You know, they try to pull from their own things instead of just accepting the reality of the medium they are adapting.
I think that, like, you kind of hit the nail on the head with that, where it's just like, just don't try to be something that you're not with these movies. Like, you already have your built-in audience, and I don't care if things are goofy. If the original content you're pulling from is goofy and it's like cheesy because it has to be formatted into a video game prior to when like more technology advancements were made. So like, I guess I'm harkening back to more like Nintendo sort of stuff, but like, keep that in it. Like, don't try to make it this like super ultra serious film when it doesn't need to be.
Absolutely. Just that easy.
Now, it is worth noting the director for the project is Ruben Fleischer, who has a somewhat checkered history when it comes to making movies. Best known for his 2009 Zombieland, which is well regarded. And I'm actually quite fond of it. I think it kind of suffers from the fact that Shaun of the Dead was much, much better. But basically hasn't had the best career since. I mean, he's made Gangster Squad, he made the sequel to Zombieland, he did 30 Minutes or Less. He also did Venom.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. Now, to be fair, you could probably save Uncharted if you dump, like, just Tom Hardy into it. Just, like, unleash him into it. Just, like, you don't tell him who he's playing, don't tell him what his role is. Just have him wander onto the set and just have him do what he's gonna do. Like, and then just go with it. And, like, this time don't fuck it up with, like, a CGI climax that looks like two Cadbury's cream eggs fucking each other. Just go with pure Tom Hardy this time. Like, so, yeah.
All right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I would watch that. Just Tom Hardy and Tom Holland let loose.
Don't tell Tom Holland you're going to do it. Just have like Tom Holland react in pure terror. Like,
yes.
Like that's the reaction I want. And, like, you know, like when you watch Leonardo DiCaprio and he's in a scene with an actor who's like improvising, like say Jack Nicholson in The Departed or Matthew McConaughey in Wolf of Wall Street. And you always have this reaction from Leonardo DiCaprio where it's like, what the fuck is happening? Is the camera still on me? Don't break, don't break, don't break. I want Tom Holland. I want Tom Holland standing next to like Tom Hardy doing this stuff going, don't break, don't break, don't break.
I think that's it. That's a great way to end it because we fixed your movie for you. You're welcome, Uncharted. Terrible.
I like Zombieland better than I like Shaun of the Dead.
Oh. Sorry, I shouldn't have spoken. I shouldn't have generalized.
I'm sorry, that's blasphemy on the internet. Okay. On the internet, at least.
It is, and I'm okay with that.
No,
I love that my reaction was, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have spoken for everybody. It's Jack like, no, it's wrong,
Yeah.
and it should be acknowledged as wrong.
No, yeah, you can like whatever you want. It's fine.
Wow.
I might have to just cut that out of the episode, though, or else the internet's not going to like that. But
Oh yeah, no.
I think
turn it
Zombieland
off.
is charming. I think Zombieland is charming. I like Zombieland a lot.
Fine movie, absolutely. Both are fine movies. All right, now let's talk about a stranger adaptation. Speaking of adaptations that might not need to exist, the 2018 film The Guilty. This was a Danish production, a wonderful little movie, a perfect little like premise-driven single location film. For some reason, America says, we want to do that too. I'm going to buy your movie and just remake it with Jake Gyllenhaal.
I'm glad people are getting paid. It's like...
Sure.
I mean, like, again, like, we're doing, like, in the grand history of, like, unnecessary foreign language remakes, which, again, is that stereotype, and it's not just American audiences, to be clear, it's all English-speaking audiences everywhere, but the assumption that people do not like to read subtitles, despite the fact that we're living in a world where Parasite just won the Best Picture Oscar, and was a massive financial success worldwide. By the way, that's fantastic. Like, one thing I will smile about in this year, it will be that. But yeah, like,
Yes.
you have this kind of, this tradition of, like, remaking foreign films for American audiences. And, you know, I mean, it's, you know, the best thing that you can probably say about it is that some of them are distinct enough that they almost work as movies of themselves. So, like, you know, I know The Departed is, like, not Martin Scorsese's best film, and I would argue it is not better than Infernal Affairs, but I'm still glad that it exists of a thing of itself. I know that, say, Steven Soderbergh's Solaris is nowhere near as kind of complex or kind of, like, moving as kind of, you know, sort of Tarkovsky's version, but I'm also glad that it exists, that sort of thing as well. Or, like, the version of The Ring starring Naomi Watts, directed by Gore Verbinski, which is, like, a really great example, where, like, the Japanese version of The Ring is one of my favorite horror movies ever. Like, it's one of my favorite movies ever, and the American version is not, but it's still a competent movie, and I'm glad that it exists. I'm glad people see it and enjoy it. Like, it's the very fundamental definition of unnecessary, but I'm kind of, you know, I can't begrudge it. And I think with The Guilty, there's a bit of a push and pull there, where I would argue, generally speaking, if we're going to generalize, and we're going to generalize because it's a movie podcast and we're on the internet and we're allowed to do that, I would say that, like, the big problem with American adaptations of foreign films is when they take foreign films that either are serious or that they think are serious or they make serious and try to turn them into dramas. So things like, say, The Secret in Our Eyes, which becomes The Secret in Our Eyes, which is, like, the original, like, Argentinian film is one of the best movies of the past 20 years, and the American remake is there, you know? But, like, you have... Oh yes. But, you know, and, like, you take things like, say, you know, the kind of the Force Majeure, which is one of the great European films of the past decade, and well worth seeking out for anybody who wants to see it. And then it gets remade as this, like, Fox Searchlight dramedy, Downhill, starring Will Ferrell and Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And you're like, did you even watch the movie that you're remaking? There's absolutely no reason or justification for this. Whereas I think that if you take something that is a genre exercise, so you don't have, it doesn't have to be weighty, it doesn't have to be important, it doesn't necessarily look like it has to win Oscars, it doesn't have to say something about the state of contemporary American society, it doesn't have to say anything about who people are, it just has to, like, work properly as a vehicle. I think that, you know, those movies tend to fare better in adaptations. So things like, say, Infernal Affairs and The Departed as genre exercises, Ring and Ringu, which are very much kind of horror, scare, thrill rides rather than important statements about the world we live in. And I think this is where I think it gets interesting with The Guilty, is that, like, I think I can see a version of The Guilty made in America that is highly, highly enjoyable in its own terms. It would probably look something like, for example, Locke starring Tom Hardy, or Cellular starring Kim Basinger and Chris Evans, or Phone Booth starring Colin Farrell and Kiefer Sutherland, where it would take this movie, which is, as you point out, a single location thriller. It is about a police officer who is working in an emergency call center. He gets a call and basically begins to unravel the kind of everything that's happening around that and turn it into this really tight, really claustrophobic, really focused kind of, like, genre exercise. And my push and pull with this is that while I think that kind of adaptation of it might work for American audiences, I think it would also do the original a disservice, in that I think what makes The Guilty such a good film is that it looks like a genre exercise, and then as it unspools, it becomes something a lot more complex, unsettling, and uncanny, and character-driven. And, like, I look at the idea of kind of Antoine Fuqua's and kind of, like, Jake Gyllenhaal's version of The Guilty, and I wonder, like, is it going to go to the places that the original Danish film went? And if it tries to, is it going to fall flat on its face? That's my concern with it.
I completely get that, and that's a lot of my gripe with a lot of adaptations that come to Hollywood, is that they're taking some of this, like, social commentary out of a film from a different culture, because whoever's in charge doesn't think Americans can understand other cultures. I don't know. We're going to make it for the American audiences, and we're going to make it to something that they can relate to, but it completely takes that context out of the original film. What's, like, I don't really know a ton about Denmark and how their relations with their police forces, but right now, making this film in America is going to be met with very varied opinions, and like you said, it feels like a genre exercise, and more just starts to unfold, and you get to a point where if I was watching an American adaptation of this, I would be kind of peeved about it, honestly, because like I don't know, I can take myself out of the commentary when it's a foreign film. I guess this is kind of a little bit contradicting what I just said, because I don't really know the like how people are relating to police forces in Denmark. I'm really focusing on the story. And when we move that to our medium, like I said, you just have all of these other thoughts that come into play. And we can just watch the original. Why do we have to remake it? Well, just watch the original.
That's point number one for me, which is like the best version of this that can be made is already made. Like, I think that the thing I worry about for American audiences is like, you know, for example, and we're not going to spoil The Guilty, as you should watch it. It's very, very good and available to rent on Amazon.
And on Hulu, I believe, in the States, and on Netflix worldwide, I believe. Of course it's on Netflix worldwide, because they're the ones who are remaking it.
And you know what? I want to say, like, The Guilty also has a fantastic website where you just go to their website and it tells you exactly where to rent it on all sorts of video on demand platforms. And I want every movie to have that. Why doesn't every movie have that?
Give us your money. Like how difficult is it to make a website that allows us to give you money and let us watch the movie in return?
Right. So without spoiling any of it, it is a single location thriller all through the perspective of this 911 emergency operator. And what I worry is that, well, hold on. A lot of the tension in the movie comes from the fact that the character, our perspective, can't physically go to a location to do something, to investigate something. So it's a lot of just that silent tension of waiting around. And I can very easily see an American remake going, well, we should cut to the cops pulling over this cars to see their perspective too. We could get a little chase scene in there. That would be nice. Yeah. And completely ruining the tension that this movie brings, obviously for budgetary reasons. But I don't think you can make a better version of this. The acting is phenomenal. The filmmaking is solid. All of those arty-farty notes are in there. You know, the character literally closing himself off as he goes into his darkest moment. Mwah! Chef kiss.
You mean the opening shot of the character's ear in order to illustrate just how much of this is going to involve hearing and how we listen and whether or not we pay attention to what we're being told. Ooh. Jack.
Ooh. So it's so simple, that like classic rule of three, like we set up his character. He doesn't care about the people calling in. We reinforce his character. If you get involved in a crime, it's your fault. Number three, the subversion, motherfucker. Oh, it's like, it's so simple but well crafted. Yeah. And Jake Gyllenhaal is a fantastic actor. He would work in this role, but it's already done, man. It's just already done.
Exactly.
I mean, like, actually look at the rest of the cast includes like Peter Sarsgaard, Ethan Hawke, and Riley Keough, and there is no way that you are going to put Peter Sarsgaard, Ethan Hawke, and Riley Keough in your movie and just have them be voices on a phone. Like, there's no way that you're not going to cut to them at some point, I think.
Yeah, that was my thought, seeing that. I'm like, we have way too big of names on here to not give them, like, physical screen time. I actually pulled a quote that the director gave in an interview in 2018 about his feelings on remaking this. And he said, "I've been asked about remaking it in another language. You can guess which one. But I'm not interested in doing that. Making a film has to be like an unanswered question. You have this challenge ahead of you that you're trying to resolve. When the film is done, the question is dead and the challenge is over." And that's, stop doing it. Stop remaking it in English. It doesn't need to happen. That sums it up and is very articulate, way more articulate than I've been on this entire podcast. So I copied it down and read it.
Well, apparently that director was asked a different question, which was $30 million.
And
do we begrudge him? Yeah, do we begrudge him that?
Absolutely
it's more
not.
than 10 times the film's original box office gross, and it's a great film. And I'm like, you could make, I don't know how much it costs to make this. I can't find the budget online, but I have to imagine you could make like 10 or 13 of them for the budget that he's getting. So it's like, yeah, sure, give him $30 million.
Oh, no,
do what you want to do.
Cash in. You do you, dog. But I love it that he specifically said, like, I'm not remaking this.
Yeah, but like, in which language? You can guess which language. Give you a hint. It is in Sanskrit.
I
Maggie,
don't know. I looked at like who was signed on with production on this, and I'm thinking the distinction between what he said and him taking the money is that they're paying him for the rights and he's not actually on board with it.
Sure.
So like sometimes those directors, when they have the English language remake, will come on board, and I think that was mainly him saying, you can pay me for my ideas, but I'm not gonna. I got better things to do.
No, and like The Guilty also was this filmmaker's, I will not try to pronounce her name, Lazy American Tongue, but it was also his debut feature film, and just a phenomenal work. The other part of this, and I know this is something Darren and I have talked to, is this is going to Netflix, and this is exactly the kind of thing that has become streaming services bread and butter, which is like the mid-budget drama suspense movie that used to litter the cinema landscape, that now we get all over Netflix and other streaming services, and it is a perfect fit, and that's a great thing, and maybe in a perfect world everyone will like it and realize that there was an original made and he can use that for clout to make his next movie.
So there's that. There's also like I do hope that releasing a Netflix version gives more press, more notoriety to the original, and that some people who hadn't heard of it before will go and see it.
Yeah.
But it's also like, Netflix, why don't you just push that sort of money behind the original and promote it like you did with Bird Box? Like, why don't you just do that? So like, I can't log into my Netflix account without hearing, oh, the Danish film, The Guilty. Like,
right.
You could do that. And you save money doing that.
And it's
You're not
worked on their
remaking it.
series, right? It's worked on their series like Dark, the German sci-fi, TV show, television series over on Netflix, is doing incredibly well and gets a ton of buzz, even though it is a German language production. Put your money behind an already good film. Absolutely.
Well, to be fair, to give, like, again, not to give Netflix too much credit here, because we are, like, wary of Netflix as well. Netflix are not your friend, to borrow a quote from James Ponzawak, I think. But, like, Netflix have, to give them some credit, done that with movies like, say, Veronica, which was the Spanish-language horror movie from the director of Rec, I think, where, like, Netflix, to their credit, managed to turn it into an overnight viral sensation. Like, it was a really remarkable performance to get a message from my 20-year-old sister saying, hey, there's this cool movie on Netflix that you have not heard of. You should check it out. And it's like, I had not heard of this. Thank you for the recommendation. But like, so yeah, Netflix, to give them some credit, have begun like diversifying and investing money abroad and kind of like spending money on foreign language productions. I think like it's notable that I think, and again, I'm going to attempt to pronounce this name, and I apologize in advance. Jessica Dinich, who plays the female role of Ibn in this movie, in The Guilty, she's best known for her role as Leia in The Rain, which is another kind of Netflix foreign adaptation, which has done relatively well. It hasn't done dark numbers, but like Netflix have got behind and pushed it. Even things like, say, Criminal, which has, I think, versions that are released in the UK, in Germany, in France, and in Spain as well. So, like, to give Netflix some credit, they do that. Now, I don't know how hard they pushed them for you guys in the States, because I think that, I'm Irish, so I'm kind of, like, on the continent of Europe, so I get my Netflix PR, and it's like, hey, we have this sexy new Spanish TV show arriving. You might like this. I don't know if you guys see a similar push for things like that outside of maybe Dark.
It's all the algorithm, right? Like, I got Dark because we watched, we binged Stranger Things. And so, the algorithm says, make a leap. Also, watch it with subtitles, the overdub. It's the worst if you've watched Dark. Anyone who watches Dark understands that. The overdub is terrible.
And I talk a lot of shit. We can swear, right? You guys were swearing.
I
really-
was
yeah.
swearing, yes. Yeah, I really hope so.
I really hope so.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I talk a lot of shit about Netflix, but I'm still
Mm.
on it like every day. So
Yeah.
No, that's true.
I
And
don't know.
I think, like we said, what we can hope for is that this helps bring more attention to the original. I mean, if they just do a shot-for-shot remake, but with Jake Gyllenhaal, this will be a fantastic movie because the original is a fantastic movie. Why does it need to exist? We don't know, but like, I guess that's the best we can hope for. Is still a very good movie without having to read subtitles and more press for the original, I guess. I am a slow reader. Usually I do choose overdubs because I am a slow reader in general.
I do love that you say if they just take it like shot for shot and perfectly recreate the original, you will have a masterpiece. Somebody, I don't know if you've seen Gus Van Sant's 1998 Psycho.
Yeah, all right.
No words. No words.
I'm gonna put this out into the universe. Jake Gyllenhaal might have a little more presence than Vince Vaughn.
Wow. hot take right here.
It's my hot take. Also, you know, like while the filmmaking and cinematography is wonderful, I'm not going to say that The Guilty is to Hitchcock levels. As far as emulating shot for shot.
I gotta love the idea. It's your first film. Just straight Hitchcock right out the gate. I think we learned from I think we learned from M. Night Shyamalan, just as film critics, we're not allowed to do that anymore. Like,
Absolutely.
you have to wait at least 3 films before you declare somebody equivalent to Hitchcock.
Let's move on before I start singing anymore. I almost forgot the last movie we were going to talk about here, which is The New Mutants. After, like, I watched The New Mutants the other night, and then this morning I got to watch The Guilty, which was a delightful palate cleanser after having slogged through The New Mutants. Comic book adaptation, slight development hell, but more so post-production hell. This is a movie, The New Mutants, was finished, wrapped filming in 2017, finally got a release this year in 2020, and I understand why now.
My favorite detail about the whole New Mutants kind of like post-production nightmare situation is that apparently it got lost in the buying of Fox by Disney. So it got completely lost in the shuffle. Nobody was paying any attention to it whatsoever. So by the time that anybody at Disney actually saw it in like late 2018, early 2019, and they were like, we need to fix this. The problem was that the cast of like young teenage actors had all aged 2 years and could not be incorporated into reshoots. So they were stuck with the mess of footage that they had and had to find a way to make it work, which is just my favorite little detail of this kind of like wonderful mess of a situation everybody's in.
Yes, because no, I mean, normally we would attribute, and this is, I'm sorry to speak out of turn, but it's a mess of a movie, and normally we would attribute that to producers meddling with it and reshoots and all that, your fan four stick syndrome. But no, here this is all original footage. This is all the stuff they shot, and oh boy. I don't know where to begin with The New Mutants.
I always think of like comic book adaptations to be very action-packed and very interesting and compelling. And this was not that. Like, the first word that comes to mind, and like this, there's a lot of people who worked on this movie. It's just not. The first word that came to mind for me was bland. It was just bland. And to spend that much time and presumably budget, I don't know how much the budget was, and to make something that really falls that flat when you have, and I'm not a comic book person, but I'm assuming very impressive source material to pull from, is just, come on.
Well, and it's like, you know, you're not going to get your MCU level of like spectacle and flash, But the New Mutants also lacks any sort of personality that its Fox produced brothers, X-Men-esh brothers have, where it's like it falls on the spectacle and it falls on its own unique personality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I mean, I think my biggest issue with New Mutants is that like out of the gate, this should be everything that Darren wants from a comic book movie. It is a moderately budgeted film. It does not cost north of $100 million. It costs $70 million, which is still a lot of money, but is not necessarily an obscene amount of money for a studio to just throw around. It's given to a director who apparently had a very strong vision of what he wanted to do with the film property. Now, knowing what Josh Boone's vision actually was, and again, it's not in the movie, so I'm not sure if this counts as a spoiler, but let's just say that he wanted to take one of the classic X-Men and turn her into a sadistic bully jailer for the characters. I'm like, okay, maybe not that vision. That vision isn't quite what we want anyway, but it really feels like when you're reading it or watching it, when you're reading what happened to it, where Boone would go off, he'd write the script, he'd come back to Fox. Fox would say, well, okay, we told you could make a horror movie, but we wanted it to be a PG-13 horror movie. He's like, wait, hold on, you didn't tell me anything about PG-13. It's like, no, we have notes, And he'd go, okay, I got your notes. And apparently Boone would go off, he'd rewrite the script, he'd come back, and Fox would go, this is the same script you gave us last time. It's like, no, I made a couple of changes here and there. And apparently this continued back and forth for various stages of, like, production, which basically willed out anything resembling a unique identity from the film. And I think, like, that's what's so frustrating about it, is that, like, giving $80 million to a director and telling them to make a comic book horror movie. And again, I love the New Mutants. In particular, like I love, say, Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz's version, which inspired this. I think this is loosely based on the Demon Bear saga, the 3 issues, which if you haven't read them, are much better than the movie. And are like, I would argue, game-changing in terms of what was happening in mainstream American superhero comics, and well worth seeking out. So again, not at all like the movie that we're talking about, but like they're so weird and they're so unique, and like they're not major characters. So it's not like you're playing with Wolverine or you're playing with Cyclops or you're playing with Storm. You can do interesting and fun things with these characters. And the problem watching New Mutants is that it really feels like an accountant put it together. Like, to pick, like, and again, these are, like, the mildest of spoilers, because, like, if you know how studios construct comic book and superhero movies, these are not spoilers at all. If you have never seen a movie before, these might be spoilers. I don't know. So just be aware of this. But
if the New Mutants is your first movie
ever, pick a better movie. That would be my suggestion. But, like, so if you've, but if you've seen a comic book movie, you know that the first and most immediate problem with making a horror movie based on established comic book characters is the fact that studios protect their intellectual property like they're clutching the family jewels. There is no way that a studio will let you kill off a character who might conceivably make a nice action figure down the line, who might possibly get their own spin-off movie, who might have signed a 3-movie contract deal that will allow them to bring them back and fold them into, like, your gigantic X-Men crossover that you were presumably planning when you commissioned this back in 2016. So there's no way that any of the major characters in this movie are going to die, which is a slight problem when you are making a horror movie and you're asking us to accept that the characters are going to be in mortal peril. The other problem is that, like, despite the fact that, like, and again, big fan of this Claremont's characters, and like one of the reasons the X-Men endure is because Claremont, when he redefined the team in the 70s, he made them all unique and distinct. Like, there's a reason why the X-Men outsold, say, the Avengers, and why, like, when Marvel began making movies in 2008, all the X-Men had already been bought by Fox, because the X-Men are, like, breakout distinctive characters who all have distinct voices and distinct personalities and things that make them unique and interesting and compelling and define them for a generation of readers and, like, you know, cartoon fans, comic book fans, even people who watch movies, that sort of stuff. And when you watch New Mutants, it's very clear that, like, the movie does not care about this at all. The characters are, like, routinely kind of fashioned into, like, broad archetypal roles. So you have the, you know, again, you have, like, the character who was a victim of childhood sexual abuse for some reason, because this is a darker and edgier movie. And you have to have one of those. You have the character who is responsible for mass murder, because this is, again, a darker and edgier comic book adaptation. And it all feels like everything was just kind of slotted into place and kind of just made in the pattern of kind of what you want this movie to be. There are sequences throughout where, like, the characters will watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer on television. And you will, in that moment, you're like, I see what Josh Boone is trying to rip off, but he's ripping it off very, very, very badly. Like, you're trying to do, like, teenage angst as a metaphor, you know, superheroes as a metaphor for teenage angst, and you're missing the mark so
No,
spectacularly.
Darren, to your point of like the homogeny of characterization, you have the bully character who, as it turns out, as we find out later, actually has a traumatic past that has to do with her powers. You have the rich boy bully character that, as it turns out, actually has a traumatic past that has to do with his powers. You have the quiet kid who won't talk about his past because, as it turns out, he has a traumatic past that has to do with his powers. And of course, our main character has a very recent traumatic past that may or may not have anything to do with her powers. We are talking about quite literally 5 characters who are exactly the same backstory, and it is upsetting as hell. As an X-Men fan, as I know you are an X-Men fan, yeah.
Even more basic than that in terms of film construction. Your main character in the New Mutants is like Dani Moonstar. She is the character who you mentioned has the traumatic incident that sparks the plot. She's the character that we open with, the character with whom we get to know all of the other characters involved in the plot. It's her trauma that nominally drives the story. Now, let's ignore for a fact that all the other characters are so stupid that they do not realize that, like, bad things suddenly start happening the moment that Dani shows up, and the two facts might possibly be related to one another. Let's ignore that for a moment. But, like, when you get to the climax of the movie, the main character, the protagonist with whom you have spent the entire movie to this point, the character whose journey you are supposed to be on, is reduced to an idle plot function while other characters knock around a giant CGI bear. And it's terrible. Like, the story construction is just awful. Like, in terms of screenwriting 101, ignoring the fact that it's a comic book movie, ignoring the fact that it's a horror movie, ignoring the fact that it's low budget, ignoring the fact that it's supposed to be a franchise starter, just basic plotting 101. It's like, well, how does this character's journey wrap up? Well, she becomes a plot function and a CGI monster. And it's like, wow, you guys earned all of your pay for this one.
To be crystal clear, our protagonist, the person whom we watch this movie through their perspective, is passed out for most of the third act.
Yes!
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's like the other thing, and you know, we'll try to get as much of the hate out of the way as we can. Is is the incredible like tonal leaps that the movie tries to jump through as far as like structure is concerned. You know, like obviously they want to start it on a mystery plot, right? Like the basic story is trying to figure out the Dani Moonstone's powers. We don't know what her powers are. We know she is in a place for mutants, and she's trying to discover and control her powers. That kind of bumbles its way into creepy horror segments, which then get washed away completely so we can have goofy Breakfast Club-esque teenage party moments, which then fall back into horror segments, which then turns into quite literally catchphrase to the camera action schlock at the end.
Yeah.
It is a mess.
And
So
like,
there
and
was-
yet, sorry.
Oh, sorry. There was there's a point during these horror sequences when I was like, is this what they were marketing as horror? Are these the horror sequences?
Yeah.
Because there's so little character development. It like you guys both said, like it's very shallow and it's very like trope centric, where it's like, if you want me to care about their backstory, you got to give me more than just like a couple quick second visuals. Otherwise, like, I wanted it to turn into a slasher where they all die, because that was the level of character development. Like, come on, give me more of a backstory. Otherwise, I don't connect, and I don't really. As somebody, like I said before, as somebody without the comic book background, which like you can definitely watch it without that background. But I didn't have a connection to any of the characters, so.
I think that's a fantastic point, is the movie doesn't care about building the characters. They just want to get to like the next scene that I guess is supposed to happen in a movie like this.
No,
Absolutely.
They want to get to the next movie. They want to get to the next franchise. They want, like, again,
100%.
everybody involved in this, and you have like Boone talking about how he had a 3-film plan. And it's like, you don't have a 3-act plan. You don't get a 3-film plan.
No.
But like, yeah. And like,
And if you're
like,
setting it up, if this is your first movie to set up those 3 films, it has to have way more depth in it. Like, you can't have this be your jumping off point. You don't have any depth.
Yeah, you don't get a mulligan. Like that's not how this works. Yeah, it's like, you don't get, trust me, this is all just groundwork for what's coming. It'll all make sense in 2 movies' time. It's like, that's not how it works, Josh.
Oh.
But no, and this very, very, very quickly, one thing that I did note as well, and again, Maggie mentioned like the horror sequences not being good horror sequences because they're not. But like, you can tell that this was very much made in 2017 because at one point they're menaced by Slender Man. Like,
Yes.
there's a moment where like they're all attacked by Slender Man, and it's like, you can tell that somebody at like Fox was like, what are the kids scared of these days? Google.com, enter. Yes, that's in the movie. Can we put this guy in the movie? It's like, well, what does he relate to? How does he fit thematically? It's like, I don't care. He's in the movie. It's terrible.
It's all terrible. On a very minor nitpicky note, and Darren, you might be a bigger arbiter of this than me, but I found the accents to be very nearly insultingly bad. Okay, yes, everyone's making faces that they agree with me. Good. We Magic, Anya Taylor-Joy,
And Annie Rasputin, yeah.
is like bouncing between a Russian and a New Jersey accent. Maisie Williams as Wolfsbane is kind of Scottish, I think. She's supposed to be Scottish. I don't know.
Yeah.
And who's the kid from Stranger Things? Cannonball.
Charlie Heaton, is this?
Yeah, Charlie Heaton, who plays Cannonball, is doing a deep Southern accent straight out of Looney Tunes. It is embarrassing.
To be fair, like, Charlie Heaton is playing a character whose bottom half literally explodes, and whose comic book character shouts things like, I'm nigh invulnerable when I'm blasting. It just feels like maybe he read the comic books and not the film. Like, again, I will go to bat. I'm gonna throw my hands up and say the part of the movie that I actually didn't mind was like Anya Taylor-Joy going full Kenneth Branagh with her Russian accent. Like, because at least I know one person making this movie was having fun doing it. Like Anya Taylor, like again, Anya Taylor-Joy doing that kind of like Kenneth Branagh thing where it's like, does my character have accent? It's like, I don't know, and it's like, she does now, yes. And it's like, yeah, okay, fine, go with it. And I kind of like that. At least that felt fun and weird and odd, as opposed to like designed by committee and like designed to like sell 3 or 4 different versions of this. It felt like Taylor-Joy showed up and was like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna have fun. It's a comic book movie. I'm gonna go with it. And it's like, if you had more of that, maybe it would be on board. If it wasn't, everything else in the movie wasn't so cookie cutter, wasn't so like clearly designed to be the statistical mean of like a franchise starting young adult teen superhero movie, then maybe it might work. Because I mean, I honestly think that like, I think Williams is actually quite okay here as well, to give some credit where it's due. I think like the moments, like, I actually quite like the little attempt at a sweet moment between her and Danny Moonstar. I don't think she has any chemistry with her co-star, who, by the way, is Blue Hunt, who's buried 5th in the credits. That's your protagonist, is buried 5th in the credits.
Yes, yeah. By the way, and I understand, like, Maisie Williams, big star. Anya Taylor-Joy has become a bit of a star. The Charlie Heaton from Stranger Things, like those are names that people may recognize. Maisie Williams being the largest from Game of Thrones, but yes, the lead in your film, it barely makes a top billing, which is fine. But no, I think like that's another amazing point, is the chemistry between our main love interests, which is not there. And once again, they paid so little attention to building these characters and just getting to the scenes. Like, okay, here's the scenes where they meet. Here's the scene where they fall in love. But they don't pay attention to the scripting of those scenes. Danny Moonstone, we learn that Wolfsbane character, Maisie Williams, I don't remember her actual name, only her comic book names. Rain Sinclair, sure.
Sure, why not? Let's go with it.
Nothing matters. She has like a little exposition dump scene where she talks about how she was treated as a witch in her hometown when her mutant power manifested. Treated as a witch, I say. In the very next scene, she has a very obvious W branded on her shoulder, and Danny Moonstone, who just heard her say she was branded as a witch, says, "Wow, what a neat tattoo. Where did you get that?" We just heard this.
This is a movie where like mysterious things start happening when the new arrival shows up at the school, and the characters take 80 minutes to figure out that maybe the two facts are related to one another. Like one of the key plot points and details in this movie relies on the idea that the characters have never thought to break into the office of their headmistress until 80 minutes into this movie that we're watching right now, despite apparently hating being institutionalized to this point. There's a moment and again, this is where you talk about like the scripting being so terrible, the characterization being so awful. There's a moment where you get that weird Breakfast Club moment where they all go upstairs and they're like, well, okay, let's have a moment where the characters bond with one another and play truth or dare. And like at one point, like Ileana Rasputin literally says, "And you can't say dare." And like underneath in subtitles, you can practically see written, "Because that wouldn't allow us to write more character exposition." And it's like that, like reveal character through action. Like, stop having characters just relate their backstory to you in, like, 2-second or 30-second monologues. It's just really frustrating. Sorry.
Don't forget, in that very scene, they're hooking people up to, like, lie detectors because of some plot nonsense. Not even plot nonsense, just setting nonsense. But then they even forget about that when they ask Danny Moonstone. They're like, "Oh, no, I can tell when you're lying. Just say what you need to say because the script says you need to say the thing you need to say now." Oh, what a mess.
Yeah.
What, and I got into comics later in life. My wife is the bigger comics fan. She got me into comics, and we read X-Men. That's when we started dating. She would take me to the comic store, and we would read X-Men comics. So like the New Mutants, probably the New Mutants is most famous for when Liefeld took over and created Deadpool as part of it. But, like, these are fantastic stories. Chris Claremont, as Darren has mentioned several times, kind of kick-started the modern era of comics and how we relate to them as stories. And more so, as a film, this had an opportunity to wrap a genre around a comic book movie, right? Like, we've talked about this a lot of times. With other movies, where we're going to get Seven, but it's Batman because that's the only way you can remake Seven nowadays. These kind of simple detective stories. And so it's like, okay, here's a comic book adaptation. We're going horror with it. We know it's worked for anyone who's watched the FX series Legion, at least season 1 of Legion. Yeah. Which is a fantastic take on a comic book story that uses horror and powers and messes with your mind.
Crucially, the same comic book story, which is the most frustrating part of it. Like, the Legion draws heavily from from like the next 3 issues of like Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz's X-Men, which is the one exploring and introducing Legion. That's the entire base of Legion. And when you watch Legion, you see like it looks like Bill Sienkiewicz's drawing. It looks like it takes its cues visually from this comic book, which, by the way, when you're reading in the 80s, looked like nothing that you were seeing on the stands. And then in contrast, you have New Mutants, which takes like the arc, the 3 issues that like introduce Bill Sienkiewicz as like one of the defining artists in American comics, literally pushing at the boundaries of what the medium was capable of. Like again, like you read the comics and the demon bear is literally bursting out of the panel. It's so large it cannot be contained by the 4 walls of the medium that you're watching. And you watch this movie and it's like, Dream Warriors was a good movie, I think,
Yeah, and like I wanted to reference Legion specifically because but you're absolutely right. Like you're absolutely right. This movie's terrible. It's terrible, and it's also ripping off something that has done literally the exact story much better.
Yeah, the next 3 issues in the series with the same writer and the same artist, and it's so much better, and it's like so creative and so innovative and so interesting. And then there's this.
And there's the New Mutants.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
and it's a shame because you mentioned this, like the thing about like Fox's X-Men movies, and I'm kind of like I'm a defender of the kind of Fox X-Men franchise. I'm a little bit nervous at seeing Disney get a hold of the X-Men franchise because it'll end up, they'll end up making, and again, I sound like I'm being really sarcastic. They'll end up making good movies, Jack. But they'll end up making movies that
How
are largely
dare
competent.
they?
I know that are largely competent, largely well designed, that do exactly what you expect them to and meet all of your expectations. Whereas, well, like when Fox made X-Men movies, sometimes they were terrible, like X-Men 3. Sometimes they were terrible, but also kind of brilliant, like X-Men Origins Wolverine, which is a bad movie but a great experience. And sometimes they made things that actually like swung for the fences and were kind of weird and out there and wonderful, like say Logan, to pick an example, or like say Legion on television, or even I would go so far as to say like X-Men 2 and X-Men First Class, which are very odd movies and very odd TV shows, and are not something that you'd see coming out of the MCU, but work largely because you got this old studio system trying to make comic book movies as best they can. And like it just feels really depressing that the last one of those feels like, and again, this is not even the last one of those, because again, it arguably happened with Apocalypse, it also happened with Dark Phoenix, but it feels appropriate then that the last one of them feels like Fox doing a bad MCU impersonation, doing a bad impression of what Disney do very, very well, or what the MCU has done very, very well. So yeah, it's just very disheartening. Very, very disheartening. Sorry. Got very worked up there.
No, it's okay. It's okay to be passionate about movies. Literally, we're talking about them for an hour and a half, so it's no, and I think that's fine. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think of like a decent wrap up here where we talk about, like the entire focus of most of this is adaptations. I suppose even our little Wonder Woman news, we're talking about adaptations. We're talking about using the language of cinema to tell stories that have already been told, whether it's from comic books, whether it's from video games, or whether it's from other movies. And the most frustrating thing, specifically thinking about the New Mutants, is when they don't reach their potential, when they don't do anything new with it. It almost hurts more than when they just make a bad version of it.
I feel really bad that we don't really have a winner when it comes to like the three segments that we've talked about here, because we're all like, we're wary of Uncharted. When it comes to The Guilty, we're like, just watch the original version of The Guilty. When it comes to New Mutants, none of us are particularly enthused about it. So I don't know, like a really good adaptation of something. So maybe we can close on that and throwing out like among the three of us something that we think like is a great cinematic adaptation. It can be an adaptation of an earlier movie, maybe it can be an adaptation from another medium. It can be something that encapsulates like what made the original so great. So I'm gonna go first because I apparently set the challenge and give you guys some time to think.
Thank
and
you,
have
thank
no
you.
idea what I'm going to say when I reach the end of this sentence. So I am going to go with, I mentioned it already, but let's go with Jaws or The Godfather. And because I think that those are two films that, again, manage to adapt stories from other media, do them better, and do them in ways that like push cinema forward as a medium. They actually found a way to take stories that already existed and use them to tell new stories that advance the medium in which they're working, and that's incredibly rare, and I would like to see more of that. I would like to see an adaptation of New Mutants that is like Jaws, that takes the book as, well, I enjoyed the book, it's a perfectly good page-turner, but here's a great movie. It's something like that. That's kind of, so that would be my pick of kind of the great cinematic adaptations.
To piggyback off of
Oh, go ahead. Please, go ahead.
To piggyback off of what you were saying though, like my brain just goes to cash in with all of these adaptations, but you can do something really innovative because you have that built-in audience. And it's just disappointing to see people not do that. And then on that note, I'm going to say something completely out of character because I watch a lot of horror movies. And one of my favorite adaptations, and I might get crap for this, is The Devil Wears Prada.
All
I
right.
get crap for that. Yeah.
Because I read the book and didn't like the book. So this is an instance where but this is the thing, like if you're going to remake something, improve upon the original, and that's what this one did. Like there were pieces of this book where like there's very dated references to things that like were kind of offensive, and I'm like, that's just dumb, why are you saying that? And then they made the movie, and the movie is now like highly quotable. It has its own reputation. I think it's very well done. It's very well acted. Everybody always talks about Meryl Streep in her role as Miranda Priestley. Like very iconic there. Anne
Mhm.
Hathaway, Stanley Tucci. I think they really brought a lot to the screen on that. And like, it's not innovative. It's not redefining cinema. It's a very basic popcorn movie, but it's really good at what it sets out to do.
Mhm.
And that is one of the movies that I will watch over and over again, even though there's no slashing happening in it. There's no kill shots. There's none of that happening, but I will
So
always make time
I,
for The Devil
I
Wears
remember there
Prada.
being some very strong tongue lashings going on there. I think there was some very cutting remarks.
Well,
Touche.
no, Megan, I think like you've really hit the nail on the head here, which is like any sort of adaptation needs to improve on or get to the core of what made the original thing so good and popular. I think, like there's plenty of examples as far as like movies, you look at like The Thing, The
Yeah,
Fly, Little Shop of
yeah.
Horrors, all based off of, cheesy,
Earlier
cheapo,
movies. Yeah.
old, earlier movies. Those are all fantastic examples. I will point to something like Fight Club, which, the Chuck Palahniuk book, I think is a fine novel. I enjoy him as an author, but the film manages to encapsulate the core ideas so well. And of course, shirtless Brad Pitt, who can argue with that. But like it just manages to do the same thing that the book was attempting to do in a much more streamlined manner. Of course, Fight Club may or may not be one of the most misunderstood movies ever made since Starship Troopers, but
We
I
have
think
another
it's
hour and a half on the podcast, Jack. Let's dig into it right now. I'm gonna roll up
Oh,
my sleeves.
I will come back to talk about Fight Club. You can count me in for that. I love Fight Club, so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
am
yeah.
here for all of these
okay,
comments.
great. But it's all about distilling what makes the thing so great. Something I would have said up until recently is something like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is based off of the novel Who Censored Roger Rabbit, until I read the novel and realized that that was much, much better. Because it's more of a very classic
Yeah.
detective story. Oh, I got it. I have a funnier take. I have a funnier take than Fight Club. The best book to film adaptation is Noah. Have you seen
That's
Darren Aronofsky's Noah?
it's a thing of beauty.
Phenomenal,
I
and more so really distills this idea of the character of Noah, the one who built the ark, yes, and his struggle with like dealing with a God who he may or may not understand. He may or may not be doing the right thing because God is unknowable, and
yeah,
the central
the Old
story of
Testament
him.
God. Yeah.
Old Testament God, right? And him dealing with his faith in such a big and profound manner, I think really distills the story of Noah from the Bible. So that is the best book to film adaptation ever.
You
Ha
said
I'm
ha!
really
funny, and I was expecting it to be some sort of a funny comparison. Now I'm
Oh.
like, oh, that got really serious.
Well,
Okay, we're
funny
talking about the Bible now.
funny because the Bible is not generally considered a book.
Yeah, I love that we're doing the Joe Pesci thing. Funny how, Jack. Funny
Yeah.
how. But no, I think Jack's actually onto something. Like there was a wave of, and again, sorry, this is turning into a different discussion, but there were a wave of movies around the early 2010s that did something similar, like say Exodus, Gods and Kings from Ridley Scott, which actually managed to capture this sense of actually reading the Old Testament as a book outside the context of the New Testament, and a lot of kind of like the, let's call it revamping or kind of remarketing and rebranding of kind of certain aspects of that theology. And again, I say this as somebody, I'm Irish, I'm allowed, I'm Catholic, it's grand.
Right.
But like,
I like the remarketing of God. Like we got to rebrand God. Yeah.
before the sequel came along and did like the Terminator 2 kind of to the the Old Testament's original Terminator. Like when
Thank you,
you're
Darren,
reading it,
yeah.
like it's terrifying, it's awe-inspiring, and it's really unsettling on kind of, and it should be, by the way. That's what faith should be. Faith should be something that you're unsure of and kind of struggle with. And like I think that it was interesting that you got a wave of movies in the early 2010s that did that. You mentioned Noah. I would also mention like Ridley Scott's much less good but also interesting Exodus, Gods and Kings, which deals with a similar kind of thing with Moses, where Moses is like, God, are you really sure you want to kill all those children? And God's like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Okay, that's Um,
But again, like I said, it's getting to the core idea of something and delivering it through sound and visuals, which is all we can ask for a good adaptation. Ooh, nice. That was a nice wrap up. We did
Good
it,
job.
everyone.
Yeah,
We
good
did
job.
it, everyone. So once again, thank you for listening and or watching this. We do appreciate that. Make sure if you are watching this on our newly reawakened Escapist movie channels to like and subscribe. It helps us out a bunch. And Maggie, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you or follow you?
They can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. My first and last name, Maggie Eichen, Iken.
Perfect. And once again, I've been Jack Packard.
I've been Darren Mooney.
You all have a good one. Bye. I'm really bad at saying goodbye.
Goodbye.
Okay, bye.
Hate to see you go. Love to watch you leave.
Oh, Darren.